Hi, it's Jimmy here, and today we're going to talk about music. So, music in the Viking Age is something a few of you have asked me to talk about, and we are going to talk about it because it's a really interesting subject, and it's a weird one because we have evidence of music in the Viking Age. Of course, we've got loads of evidence of it. We'll see what we've got. But in terms of Viking music, we've got very little evidence. And one of the things that people have been asking me is, are people like Wardruna or Heilung, are they accurate representations of music in the Viking Age? And the answer is no. But as a qualifier here, because I will get people in the comments coming at me, I love both Heilung and Wardruna. And actually, Einar from Wardruna was at York Viking Festival a couple of years ago, and it was incredibly rad. But they cannot be accurate to Viking Age or Norse music from the Viking Age because we don't know what the hell it sounded like. And I love what they do. Both of those bands are fantastic. They're super cool. I'm a cellist. I have my cello here. His name is Tunji. He, him pronouns, just in case you were wondering. And I think what they do is fantastic. But Viking music is a really weird topic because there will be websites that will say things like, we know what the Vikings sounded like, we know how their music was used, we know what they preferred in terms of instrumentation, and we cannot make blanket statements like that because the evidence that we have is really fragmentary. I sound a bit rough today, I'm getting over a cold, but we're going to talk about Viking Age music, and we're going to start with a theory. So music theory sucks. It just does. And I was terrible at it in school, so you all have to suffer with me. And we have writings from people like Isidore of Seville, who is a 6th and 7th century writer, who talks about things like the human voice being a gift from God, and wind instruments being better than string instruments because wind instruments are more like a human voice, they imitate the human voice, and therefore they are holier than string instruments. Don't listen. Except for you. You're great. You rock. We have things like that from before the Viking Age, from the 6th and 7th centuries. We have those manuscripts being rewritten throughout the medieval period. We have corpi, of classical Roman and Greek texts talking about polyphony, harmony, how many strings your zither should have. Well, it's a zither. Bad example. Music theory at the time obviously includes things like polyphony. We know from writings and depictions that people were singing, they were singing songs, they were singing poems, the skald, the beirdd were singing songs and singing poems accompanied by musical instruments. We know that for a fact. Therefore, polyphony existed. The voice combined with the instrument is a melody and a harmony. Therefore, there's the basics of polyphonic music for you. What we don't have are texts that say things like, this is how you compose music in the 10th century. This is how good music should sound in Viking Age Scandinavia. We don't have evidence of that. We don't really have the evidence of what Byzantine music in the 10th century sounded like, and whether Imperial Byzantine popular music was different to Varangian quarter music in the Viking Age, right? We don't have that kind of information, so we can't make leaps and say this is what Viking Age music sounded like in a posh place, in a common place, in a peasant circle, in a jarl's circle. We don't know that. So we can't make those kinds of bold blanket statements of like, this is what Vikings liked, this is what they didn't like. What we do have is some archaeology, and that is what we are going to talk about next. But first, business, Jimmy. Yeah, well, tell him he's lucky to have one kneecap, isn't he? I've got to go. I'll phone you back. Hello. Didn't see you there. You just found me on a business call, completely unrelated to what we're talking about. You look uncomfortable. I'm assuming that that's because your internet security is inadequate. And that's absolutely understandable, because you don't have NordVPN. NordVPN, I hear you cry. They're the ones that sponsor the big YouTube channels, aren't they? Yes, and now they sponsor me. NordVPN provides you with a virtual private network. And I'm not an expert, but I have it. And full disclosure, they gave me some free NordVPN time. It's really cool. It lets me watch Netflix wherever I am in the world. Basically, a VPN allows you to bypass things like internet censorship based on your geography. So if you want to stream something that is available in your home country and you are in a different country, you can use NordVPN to bypass that. It also allows you to protect yourself from things like phishing scams and all those other horrible things that people on the internet want to do to you. Now, thanks to amazing work by my agent, you can go to nordvpn.com/Welsh and use the code Welsh at checkout to get yourself 4 months extra on a 2-year subscription, which is pretty darn cool, and effectively it costs about as much as like a cup of coffee a month. You also get a 30-day money-back guarantee, which is well worth having by anybody's standards, but you won't need it because NordVPN genuinely is really cool. Like, how do you think I managed to watch The Winter King whilst I was in North America? I used NordVPN. It's amazing. So, if you want to beef up your internet security, you want a virtual private network, and you want the best that you can get, and you want 4 months extra on a 2-year subscription, go to nordvpn.com/Welsh and use the code Welsh at checkout, and you will get your 4 months extra free on a 2-year subscription. Go get your internet security beefed up. Okay, full disclosure, the battery on my camera ran out and I can't remember where we got to. So yeah, people like Isidore of Seville give us an interesting insight into where music theory was in the 6th and 7th centuries. And we have things from just after the Viking Age, so things like the 13th century, so 150 years after the Viking Age, basically, where we have the start of notation, we have the start of intervals and the gaps between notes and that sort of thing beginning to be codified and written down. And obviously now we have things like, beats per second and the precise wavelengths of sound that make a note. And they didn't have that 1,000 years ago. So in terms of things like where you tune your lowest string to on your instrument, that's probably varying a lot depending on where you are. And I know I say a lot of the time on my channel that there's nuance and it's okay to say we don't know things, and this is one where we really, really don't know. And it annoys me when there are blanket statements on websites and in interviews where people say, oh, this is what Viking music would have sounded like. We don't know what it would have sounded like. We cannot say. But anyway, you want to know about the music, right? So let's talk about what we've got. Hi, Editing Jimmy here. I've just been finishing the video and I realised I forgot to mention flutes. And we have finds of dozens of flutes, what could be described as recorders and flutes. Some of them are clearly designed to be played side on. Some of them are clearly designed to be played just as recorders. Some look like they must have had separate reeds and mouthpieces. So we have dozens of examples of these with between 1 and 6 holes, I think, for tuning. We also have some interesting, mysterious items from Denmark, which look like they might be the centre parts of hornpipes. So they would have had horns inserted on one end and then a mouthpiece on the other to form a hornpipe, which is also an instrument that becomes part of traditional Welsh music in the late medieval period. So loads and loads of flutes, loads and loads of whistles. Back to me. Present Jimmy? Present day Jimmy? Presenting Jimmy. Back to presenting Jimmy. In terms of archaeology, we have a surprising number of finds. And I live in York, and about 2 miles away from where I am right now is York Viking Centre. Jorvik Viking Centre is great. They have a fantastic collection of artefacts. I'm hoping to film there at some point. And amongst their artefacts, they have the Coppergate panpipes. And the Coppergate panpipes are really, really cool. They are like a little wooden set of panpipes, about this big, about that big, about face-sized. And you can basically blow A, B, C, D, E into the 5 holes, and they still work after 1,000 years. They've got little beveled edges on the holes and everything to make it comfortable to blow in, to get your embouchure nice. They also have what appears to be a tuning peg, a little tuning peg, presumably for a member of the lute family. So the lute, as a family of instruments, it's a body with a neck with strings that stretch over them, right? My cello is basically a lute, but big lute. And this beautiful little tuning peg suggests that 1100 years ago, somebody over there was playing a stringed instrument tuned with pegs, possibly played with a bow, and we've got no idea what it was. Potentially a 6-string lyre, potentially a 3-string or 4-string crwth, Welsh instrument called a crwth, C-R-W-T-H, which is where the word crowther, the name crowther, comes from, but we've got no idea. There's also a fragment of wood that's been interpreted as a bridge. The bridge, that bit there, I can't see it. It's that bit there, stretches the strings, does that to the strings. That's the bridge. So, somebody 1,000 years ago in York was playing a stringed instrument. They were jamming on a string instrument with a bridge. Not the holiest of instruments, obviously, but it's really, really cool. Maybe they even jammed with the guy that played the panpipes. Wouldn't that be awesome? And it would be a bit like those guys that play the panpipes in their traditional. I think they're Peruvian guys in their traditional gear that play the panpipes, and they've always got a guitar. So maybe it was a busker that sounded weirdly similar to those Peruvian guys that you see in a lot of city centres. Well, that'd be cool. 1,000 years ago. Now, the bridge at Jorvik actually is quite controversial because the debate rages on about whether it's a 6-string bridge or a 7-string bridge. And the theory is it's a 6-string bridge, like it's a 6-string guitar, and that's fair. Isidore of Seville writes about how in classical times 7 voices were a really nice harmony, so it's potentially a 7-string bridge based off classical ideals, but we don't know. What we also have are fun percussion instruments. They're like they're bones. It's just bones with a hole in the middle. You string the bone onto a thread of some sort, possibly gut, possibly hempen rope. You twist it up, and then you let it go, and it just goes vrrr, and it's really cool. It's like a vrrr noise. That's the noise it makes. And the theory behind this is it's a soundscape instrument. It's not there just to provide melody or harmony. It's a atmospheric thing, like your storytelling around the fire. The skjald is there telling you tales of Sigurd and Fafnir, for the blowing wind, or something like that. But we don't know. Might be nonsense. I love the idea that that's how these are being used. They're being used as special effects instruments, right? I think that's really, really cool. We also have evidence of things like harps. There's a lovely 13th century image that we have that shows, 14th century, that shows loads of different instruments. So lots of different lute-based instruments, lots of lyres, and also a harp, all of which have tuning pegs. And we know that harps were being used. Harps are often shown in depictions of, for example, King David. Biblical depictions of King David often show him playing a harp. Various types of harp are depicted, like tall harps, like the Telyn Fawr, the great harp, the Welsh national instrument today. So that's pretty cool, right? 1,000 years plus of cultural continuity. Sometimes he's playing a smaller harp, like an Irish-style harp. And we, again, don't know exactly how these were tuned, but we have 8th, 9th, and 10th century stone carvings of harps from Ireland, from what is now Scotland, so the Goidelic and Brythonic tradition of using harps in music is at least 1,300 years old, which is so cool in itself. We have one mention of what Viking music sounded like, of what Old Norse music sounded like, and that comes from Al-Tartushi. We've mentioned him before. Al-Tartushi is an Arabic traveller More properly, he's probably a Judeo-Islamic, Spanish-Arabic traveller. It's not like ethnicity and race is a recent thing to become complicated. It was complicated 1,000 years ago as well. But he comes to Hedeby 1,100 years ago, the 10th century, and he describes the singing that he hears as being like the howling of dogs, but worse. A lot of people say that he describes it as grunting. They then make the massive leap of saying that it must be throat singing. There is no evidence of that. There is zero evidence of throat singing in an Old Norse or indeed medieval European context. That is not a thing. We have evidence that they sounded, to this guy from 1,000 miles away, like howling dogs. Howling dogs do not sound like Mongolian throat singers. Not sure if you've heard them. Different noises. So, we've got depictions of harps. We don't have any bits of harps that I'm aware of from the Viking Age, but we do have bits of harps from 1600 BC. We've got the lyre from Ur, for goodness sake. Like, we've got Mesopotamian lyres from the Bronze Age. We know harps were being used. We know that tuning-pegged string instruments were being used. So we know that lutes and lyres and harps are being used. We know that the lure is being used. The lure is an amazing thing. It's basically a metre-long trumpet, the long tutor. And we have one that is, I think, 1.06, so like what? 1 metre and 6 centimetres long, from the Osseberg ship burial. So we know that in the 9th century, in high-status contexts, 1 metre long wooden trumpets are being played for some reason. We don't know why specifically. There are, as I say, websites that will claim they were used for XYZ purpose. We don't know for sure. Probably they were being used in religious ceremonies. Probably things like the bucken horn, the Norwegian bucken horn, the goat horn, was being used in warfare. Horns were probably being used to marshal troops and for general musical reasons. They're musical instruments. Why do you use musical instruments now? You use them for a casual jam round your mate's house. You use them at a folk open mic night. You use them at concerts. You use them in the military. You use them in film. You use music everywhere. We know the Romans were using them everywhere. We know people in the later medieval age were using them everywhere. Music is everywhere, and it always has been. So, to sum up, Viking Age music. They had horns, they had bagpipes. There's a weird French manuscript that I have found and then lost, but it describes making a bagpipe out of cats, and if I can find it, I will do a video on it. And I'm really sorry I can't find it, because saying that you have a source on something and then not being able to find it is a thing that liars do. I promise I've got it somewhere. But they probably had drums, they definitely had lutes and lyres, they definitely had harps, and according to at least one person, their singing sucked. So, Viking Age music. As varied as music today, almost certainly. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, and if you want to support the channel financially, of course, we have the Patreon page, we have the Ko-fi link in the description, and if you just want to support the channel by subscribing and clicking on the bell button, then do that as well. It's always appreciated. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for coming along. Thank you to everybody who's been super supportive recently through difficult times and who's been sending me cool stuff like this flipping neck ring, right? Look at this. Incredible people that subscribe to this channel. It's unbelievable, the cool, skilled, fantastic anti-capitalists that we have here. But, diolch yn fawr iawn am ymuno. Thank you so much for joining me. Tan tro nesa, till the next time, hwyl fawr. Till the next time. Bye-bye. What did I talk about? I talked about Al-Tartushi. I talked about harps, lyres. I talked about you. I mentioned you, didn't I? You got mentioned. This is the first time you're on the channel. Nearly 4 years and you finally appeared on the channel. How do you feel about that? I feel like I should play you more. Oh, I agree. Why didn't I play you now? Because you're super out of tune. Because I'm a bad cellist. Sorry, Rachel.